Alrighty, welcome back, folks. I'm going to go ahead and get started with our first video of the day here. Going over week 23 of the ECHL season. What we're going to start with right off the bat is the fighting majors that occurred in last week's games, as well as penalty shots that may have occurred. Last week we did have 39 games on the ECHL slate. There were only fights in 12 of those games, or 30%, just slightly over 30% of those games that did have a fight. Again, that number just slightly down from what it was last week in terms of both fights and games. There was one fewer game from last week to this week, or this most recent week. But again, as we get closer to the postseason and as these teams are fighting for those final playoff berths, didn't have anybody clinch over the weekend, but we have some teams that are getting really close. Again, as we see those teams getting closer to that, I do expect those fighting numbers to continue to drop. But what we're going to go ahead and do is we will go ahead and get into what happened last week. First fight of the week was with Sean Allen and Johnny Walker. Sean Allen of Cincinnati, Johnny Walker of Utah. Sean Allen did get in his 7th fight of the year. I'm not going to go over every single fight that happened just because there's so many of them. If you are interested in that, drop a comment down below, and I'll go ahead and let you know exactly what happened. But some names of note here: Mark Lewinsky of Wichita did get his 9th fighting major of the year. So Lewinsky, if he gets in one more fight, he will be suspended for 1 game. And then also Tyson Helgeson of Rapid City did get in his 8th fight of the year, which again, he's now 2 away. If he gets into his 10th fight, he will be suspended for 1 game. Did have a handful of guys, that are above the halfway point in terms of fights, so past 6. And as I mentioned, both Lewinsky with number 9 and Helgeson with number 8 did have a few guys, including Stephen Leonard Stephen Leonard got his 5th, and then Colin Felix of Reading, as well as Johnny Walker of Utah, got in their 6th fights of the year, along with Michael Robidoux of Allen, got in his 6th fighting major of the season. But yeah, nothing really spectacular happened in terms of fights. We're going to go ahead and go down the list of all 28 teams for their fighting majors as well. Number 1 on the season in fighting majors is the Orlando Solar Bears with 40. Tied for 2nd, we have the Greenville Swamp Rabbits and the Wichita Thunder, both with 33 fighting majors on the year. And then we have the Fort Wayne Comets and Iowa Heartlanders tied for the 4th most fighting majors on the year with 32. And then the Florida Everblades and the South Carolina Stingrays both tied for the 6th most fights in the ECHL with 31. And then we have the Atlanta Gladiators and the Reading Royals are tied for 8th with 30 fighting majors on the year. The Savannah Ghost Pirates round out our top 10 with 28 fighting majors on the year. What's of note for that for me, what's interesting, is that 6 of the 7 teams in the Southern Division, the only team not in the top 10 from the South, is the Jacksonville Icemen. That is interesting to me. As I mentioned, we have a lot of these teams that are vying for playoff position, and we're going to go over that in more detail when I go over the South Division, about just how close that division is. But that is something that's interesting to me, is that you have those teams that are all vying very, very competitively for a playoff spot, and they're so high on the ECHL's list of fighting majors on the year. In 11th place, we have the Wheeling Nailers, and then tied for 12th, we have the Trois-Rivières Lions, the Kansas City Mavericks, as well as the Utah Grizzlies. And then tied for the 15th most fighting majors on the year are the Allen Americans and the Idaho Steelheads. Tied for 17th most fights in the year are the Jacksonville Icemen, the Rapid City Rush, as well as the Cincinnati Cyclones. And then 20th by themselves are the Indy Fuel. And then in 21st, we have the Kalamazoo Wings. In 22nd are the Toledo Walleye. Tied for 23rd, we have the Maine Mariners, the Newfoundland Growlers, as well as the Tulsa Oilers. And then in 26th, we have the Adirondack Thunder. And then 27th is the Norfolk Admirals. And then the fewest fighting majors on the year is the Worcester Railers, which is 13 fighting majors for the Railers. And then the ECHL across the league has 710 fighting majors up to this point of the season. The other thing we're going to go over very quickly is we had our 24th penalty shot of the year, happened over the weekend with Alex Aliardi scoring on Ryan Fanti. of Fort Wayne. Eliardi with Rapid City's second penalty shot of the year. Logan Nelson took the other one. He did not score against Trent Miner of Utah. Ryan Fanti did face his second penalty shot of the year earlier this year. He stopped Colton Hargrove of Allen. We've had multiple goaltenders that have faced penalty shots this year. Excuse me, there have now been five, I believe it is. 2, 3, 4. Yep, five different goaltenders have faced multiple penalty shots this year. Those five individuals are Mitchell Weeks of the Indy Fuel, Daniil Chekalev of the Rapid City Rush, Mark Sinclair of the Cincinnati Cyclones, Shane Starrett of the Kansas City Mavericks, and now Ryan Fanti of the Fort Wayne Comets. Those gentlemen have, again, the five that have all faced multiple penalty shots this year. Of those five, Shane Starrett is the only one who has stopped both penalty shots that he has faced. Every other one has saved one and then stopped one. We've had multiple teams that have had multiple penalty shots. As I mentioned, Rapid City, that was just their second penalty shot of the year. There is nobody, I believe, let me just make sure of this really quickly here. There is no team that has had 3 penalty shots this year. Excuse me, Allen has had 3 penalty shots this year. Allen is the only team that has had 3 penalty shots. The Americans have not been successful in any of their 3 attempts so far this year. Hank Crone took one against Adam Scheel of Idaho, and then Aiden Brown took one against Shane Starrett of Kansas City, and then again Colton Hargrove against Ryan Fanti. Again, there have been other teams that have had 2, Wichita, Tulsa, Indy, Toledo, and Iowa, as well as Rapid City, have all taken 2. But again, there's been no team that has been successful on multiple penalty shots, or excuse me, Tulsa has been successful on both of their penalty shots this year. Eddie Matsushima scored against Mitchell Weeks, and then Tyler Polson scored on Daniil Chekalev of Rapid City. So Tulsa has been successful on both of theirs. Allen does lead the league with 3 penalty shots, but again, the Americans have been unsuccessful on all 3 of their penalty shots so far this year. Shooters shooting at 29% on those penalty shots, so that's 7 out of 24 has been the success rate, and this is the second time this year that we've had back-to-back shooters be successful in penalty shots. Indy's Chad Yetman scored on Cincinnati's Mark Sinclair, and then Worcester's Reese Newkirk scored on Newfoundland's Keith Petruzzelli. That was the only other time this season that we've had consecutive penalty shots that were successful. So that's where our fighting majors and our penalty shots stand this year. Next up, we're going to go over our standings for the ECHL, what the playoffs look like. We're going to start with the ECHL's North Division, and then after that, it will be ECHL's South Division, and just look at what the Eastern Conference is looking like for the ECHL playoffs. And then after that, we're going to look at the ECHL Central Division, what happened with all teams in those divisions, as well as what their schedules look like for this week, as well as what I think the playoffs are looking like for this week. And then either later today or first thing tomorrow, we're going to have videos on what happened with the Indy Fuel last week. Not fantastic results, good way to end the weekend, but overall not a great weekend for the Indy Fuel. And then we're also going to go over the Indy Fuel coaching stats as well as their schedule and ends for goal. It's going to get a little bit more in-depth with those. So those, keep your eyes peeled for those. Those are going to be coming either later today or tomorrow. But stay tuned, folks, for the ECHL's North Division. That one's coming next.